We are so excited to be here today, especially because yesterday itself the Ethereum ETF got approved by SEC. There was a green signal, and everybody's extremely enthusiastic. The crypto community is in very high spirits, and we are here today talking about something very interesting in the DeFi space. I think it all just adds up that how quickly we are progressing. There are so many milestones this year. I think it will be one of the key landmark years for crypto development in terms of regulations, especially. And yeah, we hope to see many more such spot ETF approvals, coming up in the next few months. And talking about crypto and new milestones and regulations, I think what's important is we also talk about how security is extremely paramount to the DeFi space. So not just in the Web2 space where we are facing extremely lurking challenges where there are malicious actors, we are prone to a lot of threats over the internet. In Web3 as well, which is comparatively more secure and also free of intermediaries, we still see a lot of malicious actors who are trying to manipulate networks, etc., and cause overall a chaos which isn't very instrumental in the promotion of networks. So in that regard, I think as we are progressing, we need to address these issues, and today we have Andy from Forta Network to talk about that. He'll discuss Forta Network in detail and also talk a little bit about their native token. So over to Andy for a quick introduction on his role at Forta, and then we'll move on to the questions. Andy, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm Andy. I lead the ecosystem team at Forta Network. I'm responsible for most things external, including business development and partnerships. I've been in the crypto space since 2013. I was previously a consultant and also an attorney.
Amazing. So Andy here has a very comprehensive crypto experience of over a decade, as you can see. And I think he is super equipped to talk about the importance of security and how Forta Network is actually playing a major role in this. So let's start with the core concept of Forta Network. So let's talk about that a bit, and then we can move on to a little more detail.
Sure. So I guess little history of Forta too. The network started in 2021. We actually spun out of an existing security company called Open Zeppelin, which many listeners might be familiar with. And at the time, and this is true even probably as recently as a year ago, I think when most people think about smart contract security, they think about audits and bug bounty programs. That was very much the case when we started 3 years ago. The vast majority of teams and their budgets were focused on smart contract audits. And we saw a big gap in the market around what we call real-time monitoring. You can also think about it as runtime security. This is where you're not necessarily focused on the smart contract code itself. You're actually paying attention more to the transaction activity going through these systems and protocols and bridges. So Forta is the analogy I like to use is like a giant security camera and alarm system that is watching on-chain activity in real time.
Okay.
And we're specifically looking for things that look suspicious, anomalous, malicious. I know we'll get into this a little bit more later, but this could be things like an exploit or a scam activity. So we're looking for things on-chain. And then the network is, when it finds something like that, it's generating both alerts, which are like, real-time notifications about these things. And it's also generating labels, which is like a tag about the entity that's involved. So the network is emitting hundreds of thousands, if not millions of alerts a day about all sorts of things happening on these public blockchains. So it's generating a ton of what we call threat intelligence every block.
Okay.
And then, yeah.
Yeah, you were gonna say something. Please
No,
continue.
you're good. You're go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, I think what I'm gonna ask is also related to what you just spoke about. So maybe you can dive a little deeper into the kind of threat that Forta does detect on on-chain networks. So I mean, we do know about a few types of threats that sort of plague the blockchain ecosystem, but I think a little deep dive will also help us understand this.
Sure. So I guess to give the listeners a little bit more of a mental model for the types of things that Forta can detect, we're only looking at on-chain activity primarily. So, therefore, we're able to detect things that have pretty distinct, like on-chain signatures. Uh, One of those, I think, uh, the most well known is a smart contract exploit. Um, so we're looking for patterns of activity associated with exploits. That's how we detect exploits, ideally in advance. Um, Another category of threats are end user attacks. So an exploit is something that impacts the protocol itself and would impact an end user indirectly. But there are a lot of attacks that impact end users directly, and those are things like phishing attacks, address poisoning, rug pulls, things like that. All these things also have on-chain signatures that we can look for, and so we're alerting about that as well. So I think that the two big buckets of activity would be smart contract exploits on one side and end user attacks on the other.
I see. Okay. That's pretty interesting, actually. But I think in terms of DeFi, we do have a lot of applications coming up in these spaces. They could definitely use something like this to detect any malicious actors. So that's great. And for those of you who don't know, Forta is also decentralized. So we're just going to understand how the whole decentralized concept merges into the security detection and prevention of scam aspect. So maybe you can help us understand this a bit.
Sure. So there's two primary components to the Forta network. The first is what we call bots.
Yeah.
Um, the analogy here is like each bot on the network is like a tiny security camera, and any developer can publish a bot on the network. So any developer can kind of install a little camera on the network, and they can point that camera at whatever they want to watch on chain. So we've got, I think, over 1,000 bots running on the network at this point, published by hundreds of different developers. Some of them are working at DeFi teams, some of them are security researchers, et cetera. So the other aspect of the network are what we call scan nodes. The Forta nodes are not like a blockchain node because Forta is not a blockchain. Our nodes do one thing. We have one job for the network, and that's just to keep those bots running 24/7. So executing those, making sure those cameras never stop watching what they're supposed to watch. Um, so both of these functions on the network, bot development and node running, are permissionless. So anyone can run a node, just like any developer can publish a bot. Um, so I think the value of one of the values of our network being decentralized is that it's also permissionless. Um, and so any team, any individual developer can leverage Forta as infrastructure. Um, I think it also encourages collaboration, not competition. All the transaction activity in this space is obviously public, so it lends itself to more of a community-based approach to detection. Forta works with a lot of security teams on both exploit and scam detection, and many of those teams are also running bots on the network. So we see a lot. I think by virtue of Forta being decentralized and permissionless, we end up seeing a lot of collaboration on the security side, which is pretty cool.
Okay. I see. Right. So let's talk a little bit about the market, right? So it's a very lucrative market, the blockchain security as an industry, especially. It was worth hundreds of millions of dollars last year, and this year it might even touch a couple of billions, not maybe couple of billions, but maybe like 2 billion or so, as projected by market statistics. So it is pretty lucrative for developers to also be a part of this ecosystem and leverage the growing, I would say, potential and the compound growth rate that is being observed in the blockchain security space. But talking about benefits that developers could accrue, what makes Forta stand out in terms of the benefits that developers can avail as compared to other networks where they can build similar infrastructure?
Yeah, well, I think the big benefit to any developer deploying something on Forta is that you just don't have to maintain the infrastructure yourself. You get to use Forta, for all that. Doing it yourself in house would be pretty costly and time consuming, so it definitely saves some time and money on that front. I think they also benefit from the fact that most of the bots, most of the tools built on the network today are all open source. So it's
Mm-hmm.
really easy to copy and fork all this stuff. So there's a ton of existing things available for teams and developers to use and copy if they want. The other thing I'll say more on like the economic side is that um, it is possible for bot developers right now to monetize what they build on the network. If anybody out there is interested in consuming any of these alerts and labels that are generated by the Forta network, there is a cost to doing that. You have to purchase a subscription. So all that revenue goes back to bot developers. So if you develop a really popular bot, for example, if a lot of people want to tune into your camera feed, um, then you can really monetize that. So we do have certain developers earning revenue every month from what they build. So I think uh, that's another sort of interesting incentive for security researchers and developers out there.
Oh, okay, that's perfect. I think the monetization aspect is also something that's an integral part of Web3 ecosystem because it also rewards people who are contributing actively. And it's so nice to see that a security infrastructure protocol is also doing something similar. And I'm sure a lot of people who are enthusiastic and building in this space can benefit from this. So that's pretty cool. Okay, let's talk a bit about your native tokens. So, one of the things that you mentioned is that Forta is decentralized. So, I'm assuming that governance is a major part of that because token owners sort of have a say in what goes on in the community and decisions and etc. But apart from that, what all use cases does Fort as a native token have? Like, what all aspects do you have covered with Fort as a native token?
Sure. So the primary use of Fort is as a work token. Both bot developers and node runners have to stake different amounts of Fort to activate their bots or their nodes on the network. And on the bot front, staking is really a mechanism to discourage spam because Fort is a permissionless network. So technically, developers could spam the network with, a bunch of bots that don't do anything or bots that do something malicious. And so there's a cost to publishing on the network, and that cost is meant to discourage, anything bad. Node runners also have to stake on their nodes. That's also a mechanism to ensure that they are acting in the best interest of the network. Similar to other staking models. So Forta primarily is a work/staking token. The secondary use of Fort is, as you mentioned, a governance token. Token holders can vote on certain network level decisions, especially a lot of the economic ones. And we also have something called delegated staking. So anyone who's holding Fort can also stake on nodes themselves and earn some of those rewards.
Awesome. Um, you mentioned about staking forward, right? And I also want to know how exactly can people benefit from staking their Ford tokens. So a lot of token holders might have questions around this. Even if people are not actively building or being part of the governance, what all benefits can they avail by holding Ford token or even staking that token? for that matter, because someone who is a WazirX user might come across Fort, read up about it, but is not really a builder or actively engaging, but wants to own Fort token because it's performing really well, and also wants to get into staking. So how does that benefit the token holder, or what all benefits do they have while staking the Fort token? Let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, so if you're simply a passive Fort token holder, not a
Yeah.
developer, not a node runner, you can participate in what is called delegated staking. You're essentially contributing your Fort to the network, and it's adding to the essentially the security aspect. So you're the same way that like a node runner is staking on their own node, you're essentially adding additional stake on top of all the nodes on the network. And by increasing that stake on each node, node runners now have a greater financial incentive to act in the best interest of the network. And by doing this, you earn a pro rata reward of the staking rewards that are distributed on a weekly basis. So um, we did this over a year ago, and the first version of delegated staking was admittedly not the greatest UX. You had to manually stake. You had to rebalance your Fort across a bunch of different pools if you wanted to maximize your yield. And so, Fort holders, shared some feedback that they just wanted a more streamlined experience. So last month, I think exactly a month ago, on April 24th, we launched a Fort staking vault, which is meant to streamline the staking process for token holders. It removes all the complexity that was involved. So really all you need to do is deposit your Fort into the vault. Everything else is managed for you. And I think since that launched on April 24th, over 3 million Fort have been staked in the vault. So great to see. That communicates to us that the vault is a lot easier to use. So
And have you seen an increase in token holding as well in terms of passive ownership?
I think a slight increase, yeah. A lot of that's due to other things as well. Sort of more attention being paid to the kind of security market as a whole. I also think there's a lot of focus on projects that are doing anything related to AI and machine learning right now, which is a big component of how Forta detects exploits and other
Uh-huh.
scam activity. So I think it's a combination of all three of those things.
Perfect. That's great. So, we also do talk a lot about scalability and interoperability. So, there's an argument, and it's actually stated factually, that these two aspects in blockchains are lacking right now, which is making it very difficult for any application to like take off in an instant. While there has been significant improvement in Ethereum, Solana has showcased some of that through its you know transaction processing, but the interoperability and scalability aspect is still a concern. There are still concerns that are plaguing the ecosystem, so a lot of people are concerned about this in terms of data processing, large volumes of information that are being passed through networks, and how exactly the platforms are churning in the data, how are they processing and analyzing it, etc. So I want to understand, in terms of interoperability or multi-chain operations, where does Forta see itself? How has it, I would say, addressed the concern that lingers around multi-chain operability? So I want to understand a little bit about that.
Okay. So Forta, again, just to kind of give listeners a, a mental model for where Forta sits relative to some of the networks that people are probably familiar with, like you mentioned, Ethereum and Solana. So Forta is like middleware. So we sit above uh, layer one and layer two blockchains, and we're looking down on all the transaction activity that's happening, but we're not a blockchain ourselves. So in terms of interoperability and scalability, that's a very different conversation for us, because again, while we are a decentralized network, we're not a blockchain. When we started, in terms of sort of the multi-chain ecosystem. When we started, we were monitoring Ethereum mainnet only. We quickly expanded to six other EVM networks, so like Arbitrum, Optimism, Avalanche, etc. And we just recently sort of made a small tweak to the network, which allows us to essentially support any network. So we've started rolling out support to other EVM and eventually non-EVM networks. So the goal eventually is for Forta to monitor, there'll be bots running on the Forta network that are monitoring, dozens, if not hundreds of different chains at the end of the day, especially as we start seeing, more roll-ups and app chains and L3s, we want to be able to monitor all those things too.
Okay, okay. That does explain that a bit. So I understand that it's more of something that is integrated into blockchains rather than itself being an interoperable system or something like that. So yeah, that sort of clears the confusion. So let's talk a bit about some, real world examples. So you did mention that there are some projects that are actually, receiving a lot of incentives because of the kind of infrastructure that they have built on the network. So let's talk a little bit about some projects which have actually integrated Forta and in the last 1 or 2 years maybe, and actually had some significant benefits in terms of security systems, etc. Or someone whom you have received a lot of good feedback from. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure. So I put use cases into two buckets. We have teams that are using Forta. They're building their own bots. They're using Forta as a monitoring tool for themselves. So that's one camp. The other are teams that are simply consuming the alerts and labels that are generated by the network, but they're not actually like contributing anything themselves. So teams that are building bots and using them to monitor their own smart contracts and transaction activity are usually like large DeFi protocols like a Lido or a Compound, which I assume a lot of listeners are familiar with. So those teams have fairly sophisticated either security or monitoring or automation teams, and those in-house they're building Forta bots, deploying them on the network, maintaining those over time, consuming the alerts, etc. The other bucket, we've got a lot of like compliance teams like a Solidus Labs or Elliptic, security companies like Blowfish that are not necessarily developing their own bots, but they're subscribing to those bots, and they're getting all the alerts and labels that are being generated, and they're using that data in a variety of ways, to prevent scams, to support law enforcement investigations when there's a large high profile scam or exploit, etc. So stuff like that.
So, just a question related to that. So, when there are alerts being received, is it on the blockchain networks or the projects to act on their own, or is there any sort of support, additional support that also comes from Forta after the alerts are received? So, I just want to understand the level of ownership here.
Yeah, great question. So today, the Forta sort of engagement stops at the point in time where the alert is generated. So then it's on whoever's receiving that alert. Could be a DeFi protocol team, could be a security team, a compliance team. It's on them to decide what to do with that information. In some cases, you might not do anything. You might just see the alert, acknowledge it, and keep, and go back to doing what you were doing. In other situations, you might actually need to, act really fast because it's critical. Like in the case of an exploit. I'm sure we'll talk about this a little bit later, but what we are, sort of working towards now is not just detecting bad things when they happen, but also preventing them from happening. So I can't share a ton about what we're doing on that front, but that's definitely the next frontier with respect to kind of real-time threat detection. in Web3 is things are shifting now from pure detection of
Uh-huh.
exploits and scams to actually just preventing those things from happening all together. We're definitely moving there, and we will have more ownership over the how you respond to those things.
Okay, awesome. So, in terms of your ecosystem, because you're, leading the community, you're leading the growth of the community. I want to understand how has that happened. Like, you have integrated a number of projects into your ecosystem. A lot of people are using your services, but how has that taken shape? Like, where was the starting point? How did you scale up? How did you sort of get more people on board, convince them that this is something that they should actually implement into their networks, and also then again go up to getting more people on board, so basically growing and etc. So want to understand that.
Yeah, great question. So we've gone through kind of two phases of ecosystem growth to date. The first was, and this is probably for like the first year and a half, was really focused on just attracting developers and DeFi protocol teams to the network um, to build as many detection bots as possible, to get as many cameras running on the network as we could. So that was kind of phase one of ecosystem growth. We were successful in that. We attracted dozens of large, respectable DeFi protocol teams that were using the network. We also had a bunch of independent security researchers and teams doing things there too. And then once you have the initial population of cameras running on the network, then you can go and kind of sell all of that threat intelligence to uh, other people and teams that are interested in consuming that. And so the second phase was, onboarding other security teams that just wanted to access all those alerts and labels that were being generated, compliance teams, wallets, exchanges, etc. So we've got a pretty big ecosystem of like other security teams in the space that are using a lot of this data to protect their customers. So we're really happy about that.
Okay, perfect. I think that's great. That it's a very interesting journey that you have had, and you recently also published your ecosystem report. It was pretty fascinating, I think, especially now that, like I mentioned earlier, that the blockchain security ecosystem is growing so well. It's like a 45% compound annual growth rate that's being observed in 2024 itself. The number could go up to, I think, 3 billion from a few hundred millions right now. So I want to understand what is your outlook for the rest of the year. One was, I think, what you mentioned, that having more ownership in terms of threat detection and real time monitoring. But maybe you could elaborate a bit more on that, and if there are any other plans that you have for growing your ecosystem for the rest of the year, do share that with us.
Yeah, sure. So and I'll be fairly brief about this, but the big focus for us is on threat prevention and
Hmm.
exploit prevention. For the first few years of Forta, we were very focused on pure detection. And today, detection has advanced a lot to a point where, and this may surprise a lot of people, most exploits are actually detected in advance by at least one team. The challenge is no longer the detection piece, it's actually preventing it from happening once you know that it's going to happen.
Right.
And so our community and the Forta Foundation team is shifting focus a lot to answering that question: how can we actually prevent this malicious transaction from having any impact? And in the coming months, we'll be able to talk a lot more about what we're doing.
Okay, I think that's interesting, and the fact that we'll have more to look forward to is also, something that we can anticipate. I think the best part is a lot of products are being built in the DeFi space in India. The developer community is actually something that's thriving, growing. There are a lot of people who are pretty enthusiastic and are contributing to the space in some way or the other. So this is something that could be extremely beneficial for them. Integrating these services can ensure like a secure ecosystem for creating these products and also enabling adoption of these. So I think it could be a great addition to the DeFi products and any crypto related products that are being built in India right now. We're so glad to have for token listed on WazirX, and I'm sure people who were listening, you would know that even as a passive token holder, you can have a number of benefits attached to it. So make sure that you check it out. And yeah, I think this was pretty good. Thanks, Andy, for being here today and talking about Forta. It's been really enriching and good to see how big the blockchain securities ecosystem is growing and how popular it actually is becoming among the new I would say dapps, etc. So that's pretty good, and I guess this is it for now. But we will await more developments from the Forta ecosystem. Like Andy said, that there will be more updates coming for 2024. So yeah, I think we will stay tuned, and let's see if we can get him sometime again towards the end of the year to talk about how the year has been for Forta. And yeah, till then, please stay tuned to whatever the ecosystem is up to and follow Forta as well. That's it. Thank you, Andy. Thanks once again for being here today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thanks, Shermana.